Welcome, everybody. We are so excited to put together this updates for everybody, but not just sort of like a laundry list of updates, really being able to contextualize this. The last 2 weeks have just absolutely blown our mind. One of the things that I always say I love doing, I really appreciate about Stefan is like we're always just like on the phone. Oh my God, look at what happened. Oh my God, this happened. And it's just so amazing to have somebody to contextualize things with. And instead of gatekeeping, we wanted to really bring those conversations and really talk about what these updates mean for us here in 2025. So we have three goals for today. Number one, we want to share sort of our approach and how we be thinking about updates because I feel like for so many people, honestly, for everybody, I don't know who doesn't, like literally who doesn't feel overwhelmed by all of the AI updates that are out there. And one of the things that we've been thinking about a lot is how do we reframe updates, make this more manageable and contextual to the work it is we do so that it doesn't feel so overwhelming. So that's number one, sharing our approach, thinking of updates not as just another tech feature, but as skills. And then number two, what does human and AI collaboration mean? This is something that we want you to kind of have in the back of your head as you are watching this entire webinar. And we have sort of like a guiding question that hopefully will help. And then last but not least, at the very end, we'll just touch on a few things to consider as you are thinking about 2025, both for yourself and for your organization. So, one of the things that I have, I think, just really kind of been thinking about a lot lately is that the things that we're seeing come may not affect sort of like everybody in the same way. But if you are somebody who's growing up, like if you're like my niece or nephew, like 5 or 2, or you're a 10-year-old, a 15-year-old, an 18-year-old, 20-year-old, these changes are going to mean something so different for you, I feel, than perhaps like, me and Stefan or like people like at our age, perhaps. Is it going to impact us as well? Absolutely. But I really think when we think long term about like people's success and the learning experience for people, I really think this work has to be personal to you. Like you have to have someone in the back of your head that you're constantly thinking about as you're doing this work. Otherwise, I just feel like you just treat it as another trend. And so for today's conversation, we would love for you to think about a young person in your life. And we're going to share sort of like the stories that kind of prompted us to think a little bit about this, starting with congratulations to Stefan, everyone. His son just graduated.
Thank you. Yes, and then I see it in the attendees. Some of my close personal friends, and some people from LinkedIn where I originally posted this. My son graduated from college from American University on Sunday, and he's 21. And I was thinking, oh, two things I thought. One is, of all the time, I never kind of thought, oh, gee, I wish I would have done more work and spent less time with him, right? I always kind of wish I'd spent more time with him. And that kind of really speaks. I really kind of think like wherever, AI ends up and, it's predictable in some ways and predictable in others, including some of the developments we're going to talk about today. I just don't really ever think it of, whether it's smarter than us, we'll still have the bond is people, just like I have with my son. And the second thing, and I said this before, he's 21. The last 21 years of my life have just kind of blown by. And, some people are like, oh, it won't be as smart as a human in every single possible way for like 20 years, right? That's like the conservative projection. Some people call it, AGI, or they have their own names for it. But that's not a lot of time. Like it really isn't in my experience. Like if you're 15, right? You're thinking, wow, when I'm 35, that's going to be a long time. But it's not a long time. And it's as Sab alluded to, it's not going to be a long time for these kids, and in 20 years, my son's only going to be 40, right? Like hopefully at the prime of his career, working with maybe some really smart machines.
That's amazing. So I'm going to go to the other end of the spectrum. And it's so funny because so my niece just turned 2 and she just says all of a sudden all of these phrases now. And if you asked me like what phrase, I wouldn't even be able to tell you because it's just normal words. But I feel like anytime I'm babysitting her, I'm just like so intrigued by her conversational skills that when my sister gets back, I'm like, oh my God, she talks now. And my sister just looks at me. She's like, okay, yeah, she talks. And what I realized was the other day, I was like, because I sound so silly saying it, but what I realized the other day was like, talking is like a skill. And one of the reasons you're excited for why somebody can begin to talk is because of all the other things it opens up, right? Like, I was thinking, like, wow, like now she's going to be able to tell me more things about what she's thinking about, and we'll be able to have like more conversations about things. And so it just like strengthens and deepens that relationship. And so what I realized was that the power of a skill isn't just having it, like, obviously, it's great to have it, but what really makes skills special is what's possible once you have that skill. And so when we think about young people, right? One of the things in the early years, we really focus in on are things like reading, writing, speaking, and listening.
And each of these skills in isolation is incredibly important. But what's perhaps more important and why we emphasize these so much is what's possible as a result of combining these skills together.
You can, become a better problem solver. Your creation skills and creativity will accelerate your collaboration, your empathy, teamwork, decision making, conflict resolution. I mean, I feel like we could have a laundry list on here of all the things that are possible for you with the combination of being able to read, speak, write, listen, talk, and so many more things. And it occurred to us as we were like kind of following the updates and things like that, we can really think about machines in a similar way. Because I think when people hear things like, oh my God, voice, vision, memory, reasoning, it either triggers people and like a machines can't do that because they associate it with how humans do these things. But what I think is, or they just dismiss it as another feature. Like, and a lot of this is the tech companies too, right? Like, oh, advanced voice mode and chat GPT with Santa. We kind of laugh it off as something funny. But what we want to do today is really have everybody think about, what does it mean to live in a world wherein these skills that machines have start to merge together? Because all of the updates we show you today are literally a result of the merging of these skills. And so you start to begin to see things like more sophisticated data analysis, sophisticated content generation. Like, I feel like Hey Gen is the one that's like really blowing my mind these days, just because like it's what it was like a year ago and what it is now because of these different capabilities. It just blows my mind. Workflow integration, just more scalable support in our workflows and the work that we do, bias detection, translation. We're going to show you a really fun translation sort of story today as well. But I don't know, Stefan, what's like blowing your mind these days in terms of like a tool?
I mean, I think, well, just generally in terms of like what you're talking about, right? Like bringing in like the memory and the vision and the reasoning it's just really incredible. And we're going to talk about some of these as we go, but as like I spend a lot of my time like doing debate research or related research. I've always enjoyed that and learning about new things, and just these two things can research and bring so many ideas forward now, and in a greater of a quality way, right? We've gone from 3.5 where wasn't a lot of grounding. It was just kind of based on its training data to kind of grounding and pulling research now. And I just find that really, I use that kind of tool a lot, and I find it very, very, I find it very helpful.
Absolutely. So one of the things that I think is a really interesting sort of like example of memory per se is, you may have seen a trend, you may have even participated in the trend, chat GPT, tell me something about me that I might not know. And you sort of see everybody kind of online sharing, oh my God, look at what chat GPT said about me. Wow, look how well it knows me. And if your ChatGPT is able to answer this question about you, it's because you have memory turned on. And if I'm correct, ChatGPT by default, the memory is turned on. And so it's watching all of your habits, it's listening to all of the conversations, it's thinking, like, it's got access to all that information that you've put into it. And so when you ask it, like, tell me something about me, that's why people are so shocked by, oh my God, it's so accurate. Well, of course it is, because it's like watching everything you're doing and all of those different pieces in there. This over here is something that we'll show you a little bit later. It's uh, Apple Intelligence inside of Safari. And so, one of the things we want you to keep in mind, like we just gave you an example of memory, As you listen to these different updates that we share, we want you to kind of have in the back of your mind, what skill are you seeing in the update? Like, try not to think about it as just like, oh, the technology can do that now, but what kind of skill do you see emerging? And it may even be multiple as you're sort of listening to these different ones. So let's maybe just talk about why we're even seeing this.
We're seeing like, and I was just referencing back to, Chat GPT, 3.5, November 2022. So really almost exactly, or November 30th, 2022, right? So almost exactly like 25 months old at this point, only 2 years old. And, Saba was saying, right, you can speak it in 2 years, right? And the chatbot could do that initially. It can engage, in conversational language. It's called like natural language processing. It's having these conversations, like drawing on its knowledge base. And now we see it communicating in other ways in voice. That's basically the way that it's working. But, as we're seeing a lot of people, they're really now kind of learning about the chatbots. And, once it kind of had the chatbot and it expands its knowledge base, which we'll talk about in a minute. And then it's also adding reasoning, right? It can basically, if you just think from a couple of premises, draw a conclusion that's not tied to its training data. And we can see this if you think when you do a math problem, well, you reason a lot, right? So it's reasoning through the math problem. And then agents, it's undertaking actions when given a goal, right? So it as far as we know, it's not establishing its own goals yet. You could see where that might become problematic, but it's given a goal, right? Figure out how to carry it out. Someone may ask you, oh, it's going to storm. Can you go buy some bread and milk? They wouldn't tell you exactly what store to go to or how to get there. Now the agent can essentially figure this out and then have some innovations, become innovators, right? Can they do their own scientific research? Can they come up with their own scientific hypotheses? And can they run organizations? And a lot of people are really preoccupied with the question that I referred to earlier, like, is it going to be like human level? Is it going to be AGI? And I find it's very interesting to read and think about, both philosophically and intellectually. But when the rubber meets the road, as they say, all that really matters to society is like, can it do what we can do? We can talk all day about whether it's intelligent and like what's that means, but if it can do your job, that's going to impact your life. If it's going to do a lot of people's jobs, that's going to impact their lives in many different ways, even if it can't maybe do all of your job. It just has to kind of be better than you, or maybe even almost as good as you are, but only cost 5% of your salary. So every most employers would settle for 90% of your work at 5% of your cost, right? So that's something to really kind of think about. And we're kind of starting to see different aspects of these develop right now.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I think a lot of people are playing in one. A lot
Right.
of what we'll show you today is kind of hovering in between two, and people say 2025, we'll see a lot more of three. So, with that, let's get into our very first update, the $200 O1 model in ChatGPT.
There's the ChatGPT 01, and then there's the Pro, which is like your $20 a month, and then there's the $200 a month model. And what's kind of the difference, or what's such a big deal about this model? Well, it's been described as having PhD level abilities. And I referenced earlier about the math. Look at it's doing really well in math, probably because it can engage in some reasoning, and its training data set's been improved. And same with the competition in coding, right? That's what it can originally do well. But then when you look at like PhD level science questions, which is kind of how they're evaluating the scientific research, O1, it's like at a 78, all right, which was similar to the preview version. But if you look at expert human, right, it's like 10 points, whatever the variation is above that. Now, people say, well, how can that make any sense? It's not perfect. It obviously makes mistakes. Well, if you think of any PhD, or even if you have a PhD, nobody's perfect. Nobody knows everything about their field, right? Like they don't know everything. And so one thing that's really kind of special about this, okay, it can kind of exceed, maybe the average knowledge level, if you want to think about it that way. But then think it also has multiple PhDs. Right. And sometimes you meet, I met somebody on LinkedIn. He has a PhD in art and a PhD in AI. And I was like, wow, that's really cool. But imagine he also had a PhD in biology, a PhD in physics, a PhD in political science. Right. So, these models, like they have essentially kind of all, PhD level knowledge in all these areas. And then just think if you could think across those, right? Most people think within their field. right? Or maybe like one other field that they've also learned some stuff about, or maybe have two PhDs. But imagine that you could reason across, like you had the knowledge, and maybe you also were a medical doctor, right, and a lawyer, right? And then when you're confronted with a problem, you can draw on all of that and then reason, right? That's pretty intelligent, right? So that's what we're kind of seeing. And then the other funny thing, it made me think of it when Saba brought up to talk like Santa Claus. Ethan Mullick said this the other day. He's like, it can also like sing jingle bells and act like the mall Santa, right? So imagine somebody with 30 PhDs not just being the mall Santa, but also really doing a great job of relating to the 2-year-old who was like sitting on his lap, right? So that's where we have, but we can kind of start seeing these capabilities, underwriting some of the agents, I guess.
Absolutely. And I think one of the things, again, like a lot of the thing, actually, I would even say that really motivated us to put this together was sometimes when these updates are contextualized for people online or people are sharing them online, they're just taking what the companies are sharing and kind of putting it out there. So you may have heard a lot of people, because $200, okay, so it's really important to remember most tools you use at work, you don't pay for. But if you sat down in a day and started adding up Salesforce, your email account, your, CRM system, all these other tools that you might use at work, it's going to be a pretty hefty price tag. So when we think about these tools, it's so important to remember to have a personal lens and an enterprise or like organizational lens. And so when people hear like $200, PhD level, this and that, there was a lot going around about how like, well, you don't need this tool. And I think in many ways, that's a very misleading narrative. I want to give you a really real example. So we were working with a organization that was paying a very high price tag for translation for IEPs. And it was in the thousands. Like I had no idea that's how much translators costed. But the Spanish one, they were like, that one it is okay, but it's the Mandarin and the other languages that we're really like losing a lot of money on. So they came and they asked, can ChatGPT do translation? And this is how a lot of organizations like are thinking, right? Like they're not looking at the model and saying, what can it do? They're like, look, this is costing us a lot of money. Like here's our pain point. Can this help us with this? And when we first tested in 4.0, we actually had the model assess itself. I don't speak Spanish and I don't speak or read Mandarin. And so I was curious, like, okay, like, and there's like a couple of prompts before this about like, I don't want to get this wrong. Like, you need to be super critical of yourself. On a scale of 1 to 5, how accurate is your translation? 1, not accurate at all. 5, it's absolutely perfect. And you'll see over here 4.0, which is the normal model, the paid $20. The Spanish, it gave itself a 4.5 out of 5, Mandarin, 4 out of 5, but it was very specific about where it didn't get wrong, like, like very specific terms and things along those lines. When we tested this in O1, I don't even speak Spanish or read Spanish or Mandarin, but I could just tell by the way it was outputting it in format because I was having a really hard time with O1 getting it correctly, and in 4.0 getting it to format correctly. But in O1, the way it was aligning the table, the bullets, and everything that was coming out of the doc was like wild. But you can see over here, you'll notice this very specific thing right over here. It thought about it for 28 seconds. So this is another thing with O1. It is telling you the steps it's taking, what it's thinking, how it's going through the process, kind of like that metacognitive, like show your work. But for the Spanish, it gave itself a 5 out of 5. Mandarin, it also gave itself a 5 out of 5. And then it said, look, these are going to stand up to professional scrutiny because they really accurately convey the meaning. Now, when we sent it back to our client, this is what they said. And you could tell it was like nighttime. They were just super excited to see it. But this is the part that I really want to share with people. If I get this at $200 a month for O1, is that for as many requests as I want? And the answer is yes. He says that's dirt cheap. Now, if you go into the mainstream, if you go on your LinkedIn profile and whatnot, people are like, oh my God, it's so expensive. It's so expensive. But again, context really matters here. Do you need to buy this for $200? No. But should you be really aware that a job is costing a company this much, the tool is costing somebody this much? From an organizational lens, price points are completely different than on a personal level. And so you can see over here, they gave it to their executive assistant, bilingual in English and Spanish, reviewed the page that we tested and said it was adequate, if not good, and said just have one of the district people like do it as well. It could be amazing and incredibly cost effective, and we would absolutely be willing to pay for this. So just want to again really show that sometimes like you see things like PhD level, blah, blah, blah. That's not relevant to me. That's for a coder. Here it is working for translation, because again, it's the skill that that quality or that feature allows for that creates these other possibilities in what it is we can do. And this is not a secret, right? Like if you've sat through any of our presentations, you know this is a slide that I share a lot just because I'm like, this is design thinking. Like this is what we talk about. But that's the same learning sciences that they're using to train these models. They spend more time thinking through problems, refine their thinking, try different strategies, learn from their mistakes. And we all know that this is how great learning happens. So with that, let's go to our next one, Gemini 2.0.
So that model we were just talking about is like the kind of the high level model that's coming out of OpenAI, and OpenAI is like aligned with Microsoft. I was their first big investor, and then Gemini is Google's model, right? So and initially, Sab and I would talk about like Coke and Pepsi. It was her idea. I give her credit for that. And you can look at it this way, right? So we have the Gemini model that's coming out with Google, and it has a lot of capacity. And one of the things that came out with the 2.0, now you do have to pay for this as well. This is $20 a month to access this currently, but sometimes maybe it'll become free. It's called deep research, right? And we everybody kind of realized quickly, well, the students were like doing their papers with the Gen AI, but then people would just check the bibliographies, and most of them were wrong, and that's gradually improved over time. But what this will do is this will allow you to take, right, 1.5 Pro, which actually is the level even right beneath the 2.0, and you can type in a prompt and basically ask it to do a research project for you. And you go in and you set the prompt, and it'll even give you like what its plan is. It'll be like, this is my research plan, and you can edit the plan a little bit or just accept the plan. I've been accepting the plan, and Saba did this example with design thinking, her area of expertise. But you can see what it starts to do is it starts researching and pulling pretty high quality sources, and you can just look there quickly. I've done this on a number of projects, and it's all like leading like think tanks and academic like publications and stuff like that. And eventually you're going to be able to direct it even into like JSTOR and stuff, and it'll start writing the paper. And I think that's one thing people need to think about, like on the education side. Like if you saw this and you're a kid, you have 3 exams tomorrow, a sports match, or maybe even you just have a date after 3 months of trying, like the person finally agrees, right? And then you're not gonna like switch out your paper for that one. It could be your whole future, right? So you're gonna go in and you're just like, yeah, like I'm gonna let it rip. And it goes out and it does its research. And it takes about 5 minutes, and it'll say like, hey, you can come back later. And where you can see where that arrow is there, that little red spinning thing, it kind of starts spinning, and then it goes all the way around. It analyzes the results, and it'll produce it produces a pretty good paper there, right? As we see, it gives you the abstract. It breaks it down. I've generally seen footnotes in around the 20 to 30 range, like a 7 to 10 page paper is what it's been producing with me. I can't, sometimes when you read stuff too, it sounds kind of like AI. We've kind of, if all of us have interacted with it for a while, kind of have that sense, but this doesn't really read like that. Maybe it used the word delve, but I don't know. People use the word delve before we had generative AI. I might use that. And, I was shocked too. Like, I just thought when I clicked through some of the footnotes, they wouldn't work. Every single footnote worked. And I didn't, check the exact claim back against the footnote, but all the articles seemed, to be about what the claim was being made. So my kind of quick preview of this is that it's fairly accurate, right? And like I say, this is going to be expanded. They're pulling general web research, right? But if you think about this, if you have a company and you could take a tool like this, and it would kind of like pull out all your documents. And we're going to talk about some other tools later that you're going to be able to pull like stuff out of like JSTOR or like any databases that you have access to. So this is like very surface level for public consumption. But the technology really, you can use your imagination, right, as to what you could do with this. So imagine the U.S. government could finally put some of those government documents to use. Um, the next tool is Canvas and ChatGPT, and it kind of came out a little bit ago, and now it's free. So now it's available, it's widely available, and what it does is, so that was like writing the paper, right? So what Canvas does is it'll give you a draft of the paper, it'll make some suggestions for where you want to make some improvements in the paper, and then you can go into the paper and you can edit that particular section. Like I always kind of like describe it as if you were working on a Google document, right? And one person's editing it and they make like a comment, you go in and you switch that. You don't have to rewrite the whole paper, right? Or anything like that. It'll just rewrite those sections, and it's constantly giving you feedback on your phrasing and all those types of things. And again, like I don't really, it sounds like it sounds like a human wrote it. Like, I don't know, it sounds like, but it writes like a human wrote it. And I saw a couple of people posted on LinkedIn, like they put it into a writing detector and, the score was like trivial 5% or 10% something. So you're kind of, you're starting to see like you can right there, like accept the different edits. It's going and it's like rewriting that section. See how it's like moving? Like it's putting all that stuff in there. Now, obviously, if you're working on at least when I work on a Google Doc with somebody, I can't write that fast, but it's kind of a joint editing like system, and it really does collaborate with you to make it better. And at some point, I mean, you could go on forever. You could never stop. You can always make a paper better. So there's no reason the collaboration could stop, right? But it's really powerful, and I used it to help me write a couple conference papers, and at least one person told me the paper was very good, so I was happy.
That's so funny. I think one of the other things that like is really interesting to kind of see is again just like more and more of an integrated workflow. So I would just say like in the chat, like if you were to think about like deep research, if you were to think about this Canvas feature that we're showing, what are some of the skills that you see here that are being displayed by the technology? Because these again, it's one thing to be like, oh great, it can split its screen. Oh great, it can do this. But when I think about Canvas, one of the first skills that comes to my mind is like deeper collaboration, right? So when I'm working on something, like I feel like we've all had this experience if you're like an avid ChatGPT user or any AI tool user, that like, if there's one thing that you want changed, something when you ask for that edit, it will change other pieces of it as well. And it's like, no, don't change the whole thing, just this one part. Or you have to play this horrible game of cut and where you're like cutting and pasting the different pieces in. So again, to have this kind of side by side and really being able to finesse the specific areas that you want edited really is sort of like a different depth of collaboration than what you saw kind of in that very early version there. When I think about the deep research one, I mean, there's like too much to even get into, right? From like, you just think about how long it takes us to do literature reviews. You think about how long it takes to like read through and summarize and find key themes across those literature reviews. You think about like the analysis that goes into things, coming up with themes. Like, there are just such deep analytical, critical thinking, research skills that you see in deep research that again, it gives you a really different framing, I think, when instead of just like, oh, it can do this now, to like, oh, wow, like these are the skills we're seeing within these tools. And what do we need to be thinking about as we prepare people to really work alongside these technologies? So, the next update we want to talk about is projects inside of ChatGPT. This one to me was really interesting because I think if there is one thing that we have all been frustrated by as well, it's like the sort of like the long list of like conversations that are inside of your AI tool and wanting to organize these. Like I think folders was a big ask, right? Like, can I just group my folders together into something? And what I thought was really interesting about how they approached this is instead of just saying, like, okay, here's a folder, drop all your chats in here, they really thought about what it means to use a folder and to organize ideas and content inside a generative AI tool. So you can think about a project like a folder on your desktop or a folder inside your Google Drive, Microsoft OneDrive, any place you have folders. And there's a couple of things that you can do inside this folder. So one of the things that I think is really awesome is you can actually add project files into here, but you can also add very specific instructions. Now, if you are somebody who is already using custom instructions, or you're somebody who had memory turned on, this will feel very familiar. In my particular instance, I did not use custom instructions and I also did not have memory turned on. I felt like I was using the tool for so many different areas that I was like, if I turn on memory, like, what if you start confusing people? And it was really hard for me to come up with a where it was going to be worth my time that was going to match every instance for what I was doing. Like when I think about my podcast, when I think about my blog, when I think about doing like a proposal, or when I think about like a recipe or a travel plan, or, whatever it is I'm doing, like my style is so different in all those spaces. So the really big thing that this personally opened up for me was I am all about specific instructions now for very particular things. For example, one of the areas that I have found it to be incredibly helpful with is content creation. And you could replace this out with lesson planning, LCAP, strategic planning, like you name it, you can replace it out with that. But in this particular one, like if you have this is a really interesting sort of like thing to do. But I feel like when you're content creating, there's so many templates out there. The 10 best opening hooks, like here's how to structure like different types of posts. Like there's so much information about how to do something. But when you sit down and actually do it, it can be kind of hard. So we actually dropped in templates that we had either bought or ones that were just saved. And then over here, you put in your brand mission, vision, and how you like things structured. And then the other amazing thing is every time you use this folder or you have a conversation, because you can see up here, you can start a new chat inside your folder. So every time you go into your folder and start a new conversation, the chat gets saved here. But this conversation is not like starting from scratch. It's using your project files, it's using your instructions to give you answers in a very specific way. So you can kind of see here, I'm uploading a PDF, right? And all I'm going to tell it is give me 5 options for like short form video content, like a reel that I could create based off of this PDF. And it's going to give me some amazing options. We actually started creating off of these, but you'll see here, it's not only giving me the topic, it's also organizing it the way I've asked it to organize it for me. Give me the opening line, pull out the top couple of ideas, and you can see over here, it's doing a phenomenal job. Now, you could also take this same kind of idea and apply it to presentation creation, right? Like when I create decks or when I have to do these reports, I want you to always follow this format. I want you to like look at these examples of how I've done things previously. And you can see over here now, I'm like, okay, let's start building them. Number one sounds great. Build out the rest for me. And it's doing it exactly the way I've structured it and the way I want it. Like I can now generate these ideas myself and we can like do that. So again, going back to thinking about skills and workflows, is that to say there's not a place for those kinds of people? Of course there's a place for them, but the kind of value you bring, your interactions with people, I think are really, really, really going to like make or break it for a lot of people. Now, a big question that we've gotten is, okay, when should I use a project and when should I create a custom GPT? If you're in our course, we're going to go into this in much detail. We're not going to go into as much detail here, but we do have this chart for you where if you're thinking about should I create a custom GPT or should I use projects, these are some kinds of different variations. But the biggest thing that I would say is like for a project, if you are trying to like work on a particular thing, like maybe you're working on an LCAP or maybe you're working on a PLC and you want all your meeting notes organized in a place. Like if you have something very specific and you want to organize those things, a project is amazing for that. You can set very specific instructions. Okay, this is all the stuff we've done in our PLC for this year. Here is like, a question I have about what we should do next. It's working with that very specific file. This is more like you want action. Like, okay, I want you to be the person who designs the PLCs and creates the workshop experiences and things like that. It's more sort of like an action driven thing versus a project driven thing. But I think another thing about a custom GPT is you're also in the beginning stages of like training it to take on that role. In this particular one, you're not really training it to take on a role, it's more information driven. Like I said, if you're in the bootcamp, we're going to go into this in a lot more detail. All right, next, Notebook LM.
So Notebook LM is, part of it has been out. That's like another, Google. We talked about Google and the Gemini, right? And the deep researcher. This is another Google product, which, some of you have seen, like you can basically upload a bunch of documents into it and then ask it to produce a podcast, right? And you have those two podcaster voices that go through and like they have a conversation about the documents, generate like a 10 to 15-minute podcast. I find these pretty useful for like, when I'm working with my debaters. Some of you know I coach debate, and there's just like a lot of parts of a debate topic, and the younger the students are, they don't even understand sometimes the context of the different things they're debating. So I can just produce a short like 10 to 15-minute podcast that they can listen before they go research and like try to debate about it. I find that to be very helpful.
So many of you know that I have a book that just came out, and you also might know that I have a documentary and a ton of other resources around my book and all the research I've been doing on design thinking. So naturally, as I always do, I decided to put it all into Notebook LM, and here is the podcast it created.
Okay, so imagine this, you walking into school, not dreading that bell, but actually excited.
Excited about learning, right?
Yeah. What if school actually got you ready for the real world, this crazy techie world? That's what we're diving into, the future of education in the AI age.
And it's not some far off thing. The pandemic really shook things up, right? Classrooms went online, standardized tests kind of lost their meaning.
Like we hit the pause button on how things used to be. Now the question is, do we just hit play and go back to the same routine, or
Or do we try something totally new, something for right now?
And I think that was the line that really got me because when like that line isn't in the book. And so when I first heard that, I was like, wait a minute, I didn't say that. Like, where did that come from? And so the beginning, that's really what you saw was just like being able to upload something in and getting the podcasts. But now you can see it's got a completely different interface, still similar, but a little bit cleaner. You can see over here all the sources. So you can add up to, I think it's like 50 sources, YouTube videos, PDFs, whatever you want to do and bring in. You can kind of interact with all that information here. And then over here, like Stefan was sharing, if once you generate that podcast, you can actually interact and contribute and kind of like edit things up and whatnot. So, like, have a bit of say in kind of how the podcast is now being produced. But one of the things that this reminds me of is like when I was younger, I used to save like all of my binders and like all of my notebooks because, like, there's just so much great information. But like, obviously, they've just sat in boxes like in my garage to the point where I think my parents like threw them away. But one of the things that this really makes me think of, like, wow, like, imagine if I had all those binders. Like, it's literally like, imagine talking to your notebook. Imagine talking to, like, your piles of binders or all those articles that are like sitting on your desktop or things you wish you could read. We had a superintendent actually share with us the other day how, like, their executive assistants used to spend the day after the board meeting literally just like listening through the board meeting minutes. And like, they were like, it was just the most tedious thing. And now what they do, they have a workflow where they take the board meeting video, they upload it into Notebook LM along with all the other resources. They can interact with it, they can talk to it, they can get all their like action items from it. He said it literally went from an 8-hour day to a 1-hour task. So again, when somebody promotes this, it's like, oh, it's a podcast. Like, oh, look, you can interact with the host. Like, oh, look what it's doing. But again, we have to go back to skill, right? Like, what problem is this solving? What kind of skills is this bringing to the table? Its ability to take information, curate it, analyze it, assess it, evaluate it, draw conclusions from it, interact with it. These are just now capabilities that even the most like, PhD level type person like Stefan showed in the graph is going to have a really hard time if you're going to have a competitive mindset. So it really, 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 I think just really, I hopefully like encourages us to become more ambitious in talking about what it means to be side by side with these tools. What kinds of tasks can we give them, and what does it free us to do, and what do we want work, and more importantly, like learning kids. Like, if this is the world we're in now, if these are the kinds of tasks that people are handing off from translation to analysis, you think about my niece and nephew, or like Stephenson in his early 20s graduating, going into the workplace. Like, how are we preparing these kids to go on and be successful? And I think that's just going to be such an important conversation in 2025, really having a much more sophisticated conversation around that particular topic.
So, next, we want to talk about advanced voice and vision. This basically means that your AI tool can speak, you can speak to it, but it also means that it can see. So, for this first one, we're going to take a look at OpenAI's ChatGPT. Now, when it comes to voice, you can use advanced voice mode, meaning you can talk to the tool literally as if it was a person that you were kind of like working on a project with across all devices. But voice and vision are basically on the ChatGPT mobile app, and it's sort of like FaceTiming with ChatGPT, where it can like see your environment. So let's go ahead and take a look at this example. Hey, I'm ready. How do you think this person is feeling?
They look quite relaxed and happy, with a nice smile and comfortable posture. Seems like they're in a good mood.
What
Do you have
about
any
now?
specific concerns?
Yeah, what about now?
Now, they seem a bit more serious or possibly concerned. Their arms are crossed, which might suggest they're feeling a bit closed off or unsure.
And so, how do you think I should approach this? This is a student in my class, and I'm tutoring them right now, and I'm not quite sure what to do.
You might want to gently ask them how they're feeling and if there's anything they'd like to talk about. Building a bit of trust and showing that you're there to support them can really help.
And so this example is really interesting because again, it's very obvious. I'm holding a camera on someone's face. The tool is speaking out loud. But one of the things that I think is important for us to consider is like I could have also had my AirPods in, which means that the person I could have been like filming somebody and they like wouldn't really even have known, and asking questions about them. Or I could have, Meta and Google now are work like Meta have the glasses out, but like Google is working on the glasses. So like as these wearables become more common and as these features start becoming embedded in all the different things we do, this kind of goes from being something like cool and fun or like, oh, look what it can do, to like having some really serious societal implications for privacy and things like that. My sister had a birthday party last week, and I'm like the worst like decorator person. I'm like great at organization, but like not decoration. And she like handed me these three things, and she's like, "Okay, can you do the place settings for all the plates?" And I was like, "Oh my god, I have a chocolate box and a card, like a bunch of things." So me and my sister are going back and forth playing, trying to arrange. And I was like, you know what? Let's try this vision feature that just came out because it just came out on Friday. And we open it up and I'm like, ChatGPT, like I've got to put these things and arrange them. How should I do it? And it came up with like the most incredible place setting, like within like 3 seconds, like put the napkin in the middle, like put the box here, or do this there. Just a very interesting, like fun way, but also again, some real societal implications. Just today, we saw ChatGPT now have a phone number. So if you call 1-800-242-8478, which is 1-800 chat GPT. It is a really fascinating conversation. So I'm going to go ahead and press play so you can hear a little bit of this convo.
Hello again, it's ChatGPT, an AI assistant. Our conversation may be reviewed for safety. How can I help you?
So, I'm actually in the middle of a webinar right now, and I want to show people how cool it is that I can just pick up the phone and call you. What do you think, as educators and school leaders, they should be thinking about if given kids are like growing up in a world where they can just like call you?
Well, that's a great question. Educators and school leaders should focus on digital literacy, teaching kids how to navigate technology responsibly. It's important they learn critical thinking skills to assess information, understand online safety, and develop communication skills.
I mean,
They should
that like all sounds great, but I mean, how long have we been talking about digital literacy for? Like, I feel like we've been talking about it for the last 20 years, and like most people are completely overwhelmed by AI.
You're right. It's been a conversation for a while, and the rapid pace of tech evolution can be overwhelming. Maybe the focus needs to shift more towards adaptable learning, emphasizing lifelong learning skills to keep up with new tools. Also, schools might need more support in integrating tech meaningfully into the curriculum.
Totally agree. This actually sounds like a really good LinkedIn post. Could you like craft something up for me?
Sure thing. How about this? In a world where tech evolves rapidly, it's crucial for educators to focus on adaptable learning.
I mean,
Digital
that's
liter-
like kind of like a boring opening. Can we do like more of like a hook that really like gets people engaged? Maybe even a bit of controversy to get them like participating in the comments?
Absolutely. Let's spice it up. Are schools failing our kids in the digital age? While tech zooms ahead, our approach to digital literacy remains stuck in the past. It's time to rethink education and prepare students for a tech driven future.
So, anyways, you get the point. You can kind of see all of the different things that it is like literally now able to do. And I feel like in the United States, WhatsApp isn't like it's a very hit or miss. Some people like it, some people use it, some people don't. But you go anywhere else in the world, and literally the world runs on WhatsApp. People's businesses run on WhatsApp, schools run on WhatsApp, from email communication to marketing to like lessons to talking to your teacher. WhatsApp is used by, I think, 2.95 billion people. 2.95 billion people. So when it comes to like accessibility, when it comes to equity, you can do this also from a landline. So now you think anybody that is able to pick up a phone can literally have a conversation with this tool in that way.
Hey, I
So
just wanted to just quickly, Saba, on the one of the comments from I'm not sure if I'm saying your name right, Mahar. He's like, "This is insane in a good way," and it reminded me earlier. I showed this to some younger students, like in their early teens, in a class I had, and they were just like, "Oh, okay." They weren't even blown away, and it reminds me of that quote where you say like, "Oh, I should know this by now," but it's like the thing you see, like it was originally like amazing, just kind of becomes regular to a lot of people. And the other thing, if you know, Mahar, if you think that was like really amazing, there's a company called Hume.ai, and they specialize in really like fine-tune like voices, persuasion, all these different things. And that voice sounded a little general, but imagine that they can definitely make it sound even more human than like what's already there.
amazing. I want to take a moment to highlight Apple Intelligence. We just came back from like a month-long tour with Apple Education in Southeast Asia. And one of the things that I think is so interesting about Apple Intelligence is it has a very unique place for what we're looking for in education. So I'm going to share just two examples with you. But basically, just to of contextualize what Apple has done, they have basically partnered with OpenAI to bring the technology into the Apple ecosystem. And the reason for that is, if you're familiar with Apple, you know that privacy is a core value. In fact, at Apple, they say privacy is a human right, it's not an afterthought. Every single thing is really privacy by design, which is a term I think you hear a lot of other people now use as well. But one of the things that's interesting is that like you literally have generative AI built now into every single tool on your iPhone, your iPad, or your Mac. So the example I'm going to show you first is Safari. So one of the things you might be familiar with in Safari, there's reader mode. So if we look over here up kind of by that, URL, you can go ahead and do show reader. And right away, I'm going to get a summary of the article. If I come down, let's say I want to highlight and just get like some key points that are shared, I literally just right click. And now where you see your copy paste, you're also going to see writing tools and you see other options within there too. And so now you're going to see over here, it's going to generate some key points. And this is all happening in what is called on device, meaning that it's completely private. The information is staying on your computer. You're not having to leave and go to a third party application. And if you do ask for a more challenging task, basically what happens then is it will ask you, is it okay to send this information to OpenAI? If you say no, it won't do the task. If you say yes, it goes into a private cloud where your data is protected, does the task, and then brings information back to you and removes it from the cloud. I feel like if you haven't seen the Apple Intelligence keynote, and this is something you're interested in, I really, really, really recommend it. Right, okay, so that's that first one there. Then I want to show you another example. And the second example I'm going to show you is inside of Pages. So over here inside of Pages, again, just typing, right click, grab my writing tools. And here you have a student who is asking for help with a college essay. But now my ChatGPT account is connected. So you can see I can prompt directly on device. Okay. So this is going to be happening directly on device, which means it's not going to ChatGPT. It's private. In this one, this kid has used a Spark. Okay. They're like, I'm a high school senior working on my college apps. and I want my essay to just really reflect who I am. I'm applying to Stanford. I want to make sure I align with their values. I want to make sure they like my essay. I've got three ideas that I've brainstormed. Tell me which one you think is best and what am I missing? And so it goes through and it does a whole analysis, right? Like these are the strengths between your different ideas. Here's like all these other things to think about. But then one of the other things, but basically what it says to the kid is like, it's great that you want to go to Stanford, but you should also really think about your own values and like what matters most to you. So like the fact that that was like the ending was just very interesting to me. And another thing that I thought was really interesting was there's no opportunity to continue the conversation. So you can't come in here and be like, write the rest of my essay for me. And I don't know if that's just because it's in the early phases or if that's a design choice. Like I wish somebody would talk about that, but literally it's almost like you have to make the first move with Apple Intelligence. It won't generate stuff up for you like a blank slate the way ChatGPT does if you have an open document. Like you'll see over here, there's no place for me to continue the conversation. Like I can add pieces if I want and attach pieces of my work, but there is something interesting from a design element that like it's like I said, you have to make the first move. All right. So next we have something called screen use. Um, Screen use is really interesting because, again, when we go to skills, the fact that these tools now can see what you see, I think is a really hard thing to wrap your head around. It's so funny. I always used to say, like, oh, a human advantage is like, like the unspoken, like people in front of you, like you're the one who can pick up on body language and this and that. So the fact that like these tools can now do that, I think it's just really, I don't know, it's a lot to wrap your head around. We saw computer screen use in Claude, but the example we're going to show you is screen use inside of Gemini. So play this for you.
Gemini 2.0 enables new kinds of multimodal AI agents, agents that can see and hear the world around you, think, plan, remember, and take action. Gemini 2.0 is what enables Project Astra, our research prototype of a universal AI assistant. Using capabilities like multimodal memory and real-time information, it lets you understand your world live.
What can you tell me about this sculpture? The sculpture you're seeing is called My World and Your World by Eva Rothschild, located in Lewis Cubitt Park in London. What kind of themes does her work explore? She creates abstract sculptures that invite viewers to interact with and interpret their surroundings in new ways.
Project Astra is multilingual, using native audio to seamlessly switch languages as you speak.
Est-ce que tu peux me dire quelque chose d'intéressant à propos de ces lanternes? Bien sûr, je peux vous parler des lanternes. Les lanternes que vous voyez font partie de la porte d'entrée de Chinatown à Londres. நிச்சயமாக இது லண்டனில் உள்ள சைனா டவுன் நுழைவாயில்.
So you just get a really good idea of kind of what's happening and like what you're seeing in terms of the tools being able to really interact with our environments, being able to help you learn. You think about maybe being on a field trip, or, a lot of people talk about their experiences being on a trip and being like, oh, like I'm here at this museum, tell me about this. Or they walk past a road sign or they see something interesting. The fact that, again, we always say like learning happens all around you, learning is a lifelong journey. Your tools now are really going to take that to an entirely new level. So, again, even going back to sort of like our key question, what kind of skills are you seeing in these updates? And what does it make you think about for your role and the people that you work with? Um, One of the ways in which we have found to be really helpful for thinking about these tools, because Project Astra is sort of like their version of like an AI agent, right? Like that's what they're calling it. OpenAI is going to be coming up with one in January called Project Operator. And this is why we sort of felt like the webinar right now was really important, is because, if a lot of people I think are going to be talking about and becoming familiar with these features next year. But if OpenAI is already like, hey, in January, this is what's potentially coming, like now is the time to just let this sit in your head, while you've sort of like have this holiday break and just let these ideas just kind of like just sit there for a while and just reflect on them. Like, what is really going to matter for us in 2025 as we're working with kids, as we're working in schools, businesses, wherever it is that you're at? So, one of the frameworks that we talk about a lot is instead of just thinking about this as another tool, really begin thinking about this as a teammate, right? And we kind of call this like building your AI team. We find the word agent to be a little bit strange. That's the word that you're going to hear in 2025, if not already. I feel like it's everywhere. AI agents. Okay. And this is not a webinar specific to agents. If you're in the bootcamp, we have a whole like kind of section on this for you. But an AI agent basically is more than an automation. It's an ability to give an AI a goal, to give it a task. For example, I need to create a January content plan for my Instagram. Whereas in an automation, you have to create the captions, you have to schedule, and maybe it might automatically schedule something for you or whatnot, or help you with the writing. This is a tool, this is an agent or like a little team member that's going to actually do the work and then bring you back a product that you will approve and whatnot. Now, there's many human steps that are probably needed along the way. We talk about as well. It's a really big theme in the book is how do we think about human agency in an AI world? And so we think of AI agents as team members. It's a much more easier analogy, I think, for most people to kind of just wrap their heads around. And so if you think about building your AI team as an educator, one of the things we always want is for the person to really be the leader of their AI team. And you can sort of imagine that in 2025, every single person is a leader. Every single person just became the CEO of their role. That is probably the best way to think about this. And this also is very interesting when we think about people graduating, right? It used to be you would graduate, have an entry level position, work your way up. In day one, you need to be a leader. You need to have a leadership mindset because you're not just working with other people, you are now going to have to be managing your AIs as well. So, as an educator, right now, people tend to use either a chatbot or like you might have a magic school type tool where you're going to a chatbot to do something. In this one, I'm saying I want to hire somebody who can help me design experiences. I want to hire somebody who can help me with assessments. I want to hire somebody who can help me with feedback. I want to hire somebody who's going to help me build stronger relationships with the kids in my class. And each of these chatbots, agents, team members is really trained by you on how they should be acting, on the information they should be working with, on your organization's vision, values, mission, data. All those different pieces are what they're using to help you with that task.
I was just going to add, one thing really specific to this, right? It kind of made me reflect back on the cost, right? And it's like, okay, well, the one model can't necessarily do all these things. It could do a lot, and I think we'll get to the point where it can. I was like, oh, even at $200 a month. Imagine you could hire each of these people for $40 a month. You'd be lucky to find someone. I mean, not lucky. I don't really think it's possible. Maybe a small design element for $40 an hour, right? Let alone like $40 a month. So, you keep that in mind. I think second, a lot of people, hear, from education too, right? And it's like, what is the future of education? To me, it's like the way Saba describes it, it's like when you graduate, from wherever you're going to graduate in the future, like you need to be a leader. That's your job is going to be a leader. Your job is maybe the future of work is entrepreneurship, right? Maybe everyone's going to be, or most people are going to be entrepreneurs rather than going and doing work for someone else. Because as we're starting to see already, a lot of work, especially common, semi-repetitive tasks, are going to be able to be done by AIs. But the positive side is like, it's just a new skill, right? You need to learn, right? Who could even imagine, like in the 1800s, if you were a farmer, like, well, gee, my grandchildren have to learn how to build skyscrapers. Like, that's like, what? Like, there's no way, like, people could be able to build skyscrapers or design airplanes. They would never be able to do that, right? As you're like moving your hoe, like down the the row of strawberries, right? It just seemed like completely inconceivable. And you think like, okay, well, most of my family, we don't have the genes to build skyscrapers. Like, there gonna be none of us left. But that's not how it worked out. And I think like when you kind of re-alter your mindset in this way, is it can be very, very actually empowering.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it just really, I think a lot of this is also choice, right? Like one of the things we always say is like, you can see how aggressively these companies are moving forward. Knowledge is power, but more than knowledge being power, your ability to think through your workflows, your ability to think through what it is you actually want from these tools and having those ambitious goals is really going to allow you to be that leader of the team. And I think that's probably like really, really important. So we talked a little bit about screen use and you saw a little glimpse into Project Astra, but just to give you an idea of again just where these people are going, what they're thinking, none of this is a secret. I think, there was a question in the Q&A, and we'll get to Q&A in a moment if you have anything added in. But somebody said, "Where can I find information on these emerging technologies?" And I feel like these companies do a pretty decent job of like really sharing their plans and their vision. Like Stefan just shared with me earlier the 2024 Work Trend Index report, where it literally said our goal in 2024 is to get AI tools that can take action, right? And so we will actually share with you when we share this recording a list of people that we follow and just I think places that you can kind of go to keep up. We really have a small handful. I know it can feel like, oh my God, I've got to be following so many newsletters. I've got to have so many things. I actually think this is a very it's almost like an illusion of learning because I've got so many newsletters coming my way. I'm following so many things. I'm reading so many things. Are you processing and reflecting though? One of the number one things I look for in following somebody is, are they contextualizing the information? And it doesn't always have to be even contextual to your industry, but it's one thing to be like, here's what happened, here's what happened, here's what happened, update, update, update. It's another to be like, here's an update, and this is what this update means, and this is how you should think about it. So Project Astra, so Dennis Hassabis is like obviously one of like, the biggest names in AI, CEO of Google DeepMind. And Project Astra is like Gemini, Google's version of an AI agent, multimodal that can see the world, knows what things are and where you left them. And I immediately thought of my glasses. I'm like leaving my glasses everywhere. I'm like, oh wow, this agent will be able to tell me where they are, can answer questions or help you do almost anything. And I think this is the one where like you could read that and become so intimidated. But I think you could also read that and be like, okay, like what is it that I want to double down on in 2025 that's going to be like super valuable? And what are the skills that I want to double down on to really have a place and just, in sort of like this new world? But you can see the goal is really bots that don't just talk with you, but actually accomplish stuff on your behalf. And so before we can even really get to a bot that is able to like accomplish something on your behalf, one of the biggest things we think is important for you to think through is what we call workflows. And workflows are basically just A to Z, how you get something done, right? So, for example, if I go back to sort of well, I have an example here for you, but when I go through this workflow, there are three elements I'm looking at. I'm looking at what is the project that I'm working on? What is the task? Might be writing an email, doing a newsletter, creating a strategic plan, working on a presentation, doing a group project, doing a lesson plan. Anything you do is a workflow. Is like there's a series of steps in it. And what we do in the series of steps as we map them is we look at what is the human doing, what is the AI doing, and what are the human and the AI doing together. And we just mark those steps accordingly. So over here in this example, this is creating a presentation, okay? The first step, we need to understand our audience needs and goals. This is right now the work of a human. Then from there, the human might choose the focus area. The AI is going to do some research and data collection for us. Again, human AI collaboration. The human is going to refine the topics that the AI has curated. The AI maybe creates the speaker notes based on the ones that you pick in your final selection. Human and AI again. Maybe the human chooses the slide design, like this is our company slides, da da da. The AI maybe use Gamma or PowerPoint Copilot to create slides. Again, maybe the human decides to record a video preview to kind of give people a little idea what the presentation is going to be about. Maybe the AI translates it with HeyGen or creates some like fun social media clips with Opus, but ultimately the human is the one presenting to the group, and that ends the workflow on designing a presentation. Now, everybody has nuances to their workflow. This is just a example of how you might go about creating a workflow. But one of the things that becomes really important is tomorrow, when you have agents, this is what they need. One of the probably least sexiest topics and least talked about is the importance of organizing your data. As you saw just from the example with projects, if your AI tool doesn't have data to work with, I always say it's like asking a substitute teacher to play superintendent or asking, an intern to play CEO. They wouldn't be able to get past 2 seconds of doing any reasonable part of the job. Oh, where's that email file from this conversation that came up? This complaint just came in. Pull those records. This technical mistake just happened. Where are the files on this? If you can't access or get answers to any of those questions, you're not even going to be able to move past the initial kind of step. So, what workflows really allow for is for you to think really strategically, number one, about who's doing what. But tomorrow, as the capabilities advance, like guaranteed, if I was to go back and kind of reassess this workflow just off of the capabilities that I shared with you today, there would probably be a lot more AI in here. And maybe that opens the door for me to do something different. For example, this step right here, before when I used to do presentations, I was not recording video previews, and I most certainly wasn't translating any kind of content into a different language. But now, when we work with our international clients, we always send like kind of like, marketing like fun videos to kind of build up some excitement, or just introduce ourselves and get people interested in the topic. And if it is a different country, like we did one in Spain, Malaysia, Thailand, we'll translate them. We did one in Dubai, translate into Arabic. Like those are things that just we would not do before that are more opportunities for personalization and just, like more kind of like nicer touches that you can kind of add into that. So if you made it this far, your mind is probably like overflowing. But one of the things we wanted to kind of close with is what we call having an AI mindset. Because to start with these features and to start with these pieces, honestly, it's a losing battle. It's just so overwhelming. I think the most important thing that I hope everybody is able to take away is like the skills you're seeing in these technologies emerge. But more than that, what we hope for you to ask all the time in 2025 is how can AI help me do this? And I think if that's the mindset that you walk in with, you're going to be so successful because I'll just walk through this with you. Obviously, you're all familiar with growth mindset and fixed mindset, right? Like fixed mindset, this person has no hope, they have no agency, they think the world is broken, nothing can be changed, doom and gloom. A growth mindset, though, is all of us here today. Okay. If you are here today and you are watching this webinar, you are somebody with a growth mindset. You probably even have an AI mindset, to be honest. But this is the person that says, like, okay, this is crazy. This is overwhelming. I have no idea how we're going to do this, but I believe we can. Okay. The problem, though, for people with growth mindsets is like, even though we have high levels of hope, we don't have any help. Like, we're limited on resources. We only have so many hours in a day. And so we, in some ways, have limited agency in what we're able to do. But a person with an AI mindset says, oh my God, how do I do this? I have no clue how I'm going to do it, but how can AI help me? This person has high levels of hope. They also have high levels of support. They know that not only can AI help them, but that people are there to help them as well. And so, therefore, this person has high agency. And this is so important because in a world where technology companies are trying to give AI tools and technology high levels of agency, we need to be thinking about how do we give humans high levels of agency? Because the fact that we haven't even moved past in education, the AI detector, and that whole conversation tells you people have very low levels of human agency. They don't believe they can change things. They don't believe they can do things differently. And that to me is really one of the most important roles that we play for each other, motivating each other, inspiring each other, collaborating with each other, taking initiative in your organization to say, this is continuing the status quo. we can do things a different way. And if you are even remotely familiar or you've had a conversation with me, you know I am probably directly referencing the magic school type tools of the world, these AI app generators that are just perpetuating your status quo and are really, really, really in the long term limiting and holding you back. And this is another reason for this webinar. Every time you're assessing a tool in education, always be looking at where is the technology going? What is the technology capable of? And what are we getting in our classrooms with our kids? What are our kids going to need to be successful to interact in a world with these different kinds of technologies? So, as you head into sort of your winter break, this is the big question we would leave you with is if you could hire an AI team, what are three tasks or roles you would want to hire for? And if you're in the AI Bootcamp, you know we have this entire thing built out for you as a series in our lessons to help you work through all the different steps of getting that answer. But Stefan, want to add any closing thoughts?
No, the other thing, you know, continuing the status quo rather than changing the mindset, right? Like it's just kind of like the trucks keeps going into a different world than like the one we're heading to, right? To reference your other point, right? It's as Wayne Gretzky said, skate to where the puck is going. And there may be a lot of different ways to you want to kind of think about like what this means for education in terms of where the puck is going. But we all know where the puck is going, and so that's one place not adapting the growth mindset, the change mindset sets us up for. And the other thing it can kind of set us up for, and you referenced this a little bit at the beginning, like you said, oh, you used to think like, well, what a human can do this and an AI can do that, and there's kind of this related theme of like I'm going to compete against the AI. If I don't write my paper with the help of ChatGPT, then I'll be able to compete against the AI that is somewhere in the ballpark of like 30 PhDs and like can like kind of coordinate the knowledge and has like memory and all the things that we've been talking about through the presentation. I think that's not realistic. So it's an opportunity. And I always say too, it's like the more powerful the technology becomes, the more excited you should be, right? Like, if you could hire Jeff Bezos to like talk to you all day about like how to build your business, would you pay? People pay what McKinsey, like hundreds of thousands of dollars to for like an entry level employee to help them improve their business. There's just so many opportunities here to improve not just society, but yourself, right? And you should always be improving. The other thing I meant to say just quickly with my son's graduation is, graduation's a moment, right? It's like a celebration of what they accomplished. But it's not like when my son walked across the stage, he suddenly just became like, intelligent and had all these capabilities, right? Like, I'm glad he graduated, but if he had been like 2 credits short, he probably would basically know the same amount of stuff. And like, you can think of kind of AGI in that way too. It's like people are kind of, looking for this like exact moment when we hit, but it's not. It's always a continual process. It's always going to be stronger or weaker in some areas. And I just think like, and regardless of all that, it comes back to like who we are and empowering ourselves the same way our iPhones empower us.
Absolutely. All right. Well, with that, that brings us to the end. We hope this was helpful. Um, If you have any questions, we're happy to stay on and answer them. Like I said, we'll be sending out the recording and we'll also be sending you out a couple of resources for kind of just, how to stay up to date with things heading into 2025. But even as you're listening to this at all, like if you have any questions that come up, please let us know. But yeah, other than that, hope it was super helpful. So great to see so many of our friends and have an amazing holiday break.